Hello there, this is Hans Forschner with Navcon Engineering Network. Thank you for your interest in the SoundPLAN Graphics. In this video, I will go over some basic controls in the SoundPLAN Graphics, such as the general settings, the map object types or object types, and the color palette. In the general program settings, we can find it either under Options and Settings or right here, Edit Program Settings. We find the global and current project settings. And so this is really underlying the hierarchy in SoundPLAN, where the user can define defaults in the global settings. And then as soon as you create a new project, these global settings are copied into the project settings. So under the global settings, you find graphics right here. And so here we have one of the first settings is the base unit for length. And the default is metric or meters, but it can be changed to empirical units in feet. And the only word of caution here is that it only affects the display in the SoundPLAN Graphics. So if we put in a length scale, you can show it in 100 feet, 200 feet, or in miles. But this is only a display scale. It does not change the underlying data. So SoundPLAN is completely based on a metric system. And for the geometry definition, that means all the coordinates, X, Y, Z, the height inputs, any speed inputs, temperature, Celsius, everything is in the metric system or international system or SI system. So please be aware of that. So again, this feed input is just like an option that SoundPLAN gives to primarily US users, that they can show empirical length scales rather than metric scales in their graphics. So there are two more settings here in the global graphics settings, and one is the color palette. So let me open that up. So this will be saved in a color.scc file. And here we have the color palette. The color palette setup is important as it offers the user to create custom color schemes. Scale colors are important to distinguish between different types or data sets, such as measured versus predicted sound levels, difference levels, elevation data, exceedance levels, spectral scale, conflict scales, and who else knows other scales that you may come up with. So with each of these scales, at least that's my suggestion, it is good to have your own color scheme, so that if you compare one colored map to another, the end user that reads the report has an idea, okay, this is a different color scheme, this may be a different unit, or this may be a different data set that I'm looking at. So here we have a total of 16 by 16 colors, so it's 256 colors. And some of the lines are basically all black. So these are lines that, or like rows that can be changed. And to change them, it's fairly easy. You can grab any of the colors that we have here. So for example, I can start with like the turquoise, drag it into this field right here. I can maybe change that and end it up in a green on the other side. And in between, I want to go over a white, maybe a yellow somewhere in between. And so now we have basically a total of 4 markers or 4 colored markers. And now we let the program interpolate between them. So I can go to the yellow here and click on the interpolate color values between the yellow to the turquoise. So it will always interpolate from right to left. So here, if I click, this is the point that is selected. I click on that, so it interpolates to the left. I can go to the white, interpolate to the yellow, go green, interpolate to the white. So these are kind of some of the ways of kind of interpolating intermediate colors. If you don't like the color scheme that you came up with, you can set basically the colors back to black or reset that. So I'll click on this here and then just hold down the cursor to interpolate here. So I just deleted these here. So let me kind of wipe this out too, from here to here. And then I can go back and regenerate this here. So again, from green to white to blue. So this is a typical color scheme that I have for differences, positive and negative differences. We could have something similar by adding like from green to white, and then maybe to a red, so like a negative. And then here again, we can interpolate. All right. The user can also change the RGB values for each of these cells. So as you click on the cells, you can change the red, green, and blue contribution for each of the cells, and basically define it and set it manually. We can plot or print the colors just to see how good these colors turn out on your color printer. And then of course you can save the colors. So in this case, it saves them as the global color scheme. So if you had others, you want to save it as backups, yeah, you can do that too. All right. So I think that's all I want to show here in terms of the color scheme. The third item in this setting is the object types, and you will later kind of see that these are the global object types. So this is kind of the overall, the highest level of the hierarchy, kind of the pre-definition of defaults. As you again copy the project or create a new project, this global object types will be copied here into the current project types. So that's also called object.got. So here, let's go back in here. And one of the things when you open that up, let me open that, you will see that it shows all possible objects that you could have in SoundPLAN. So it doesn't matter what kind of configuration, it will show you all the possibility in terms of input or general objects, any tools, traffic sources, industrial sources, any aircraft noise sources, environmental objects, receivers, area usages, that's for zoning, and then of course here all the different types of results. So let me close that. And for example, the results, we have a list of somewhere around 15 different types of results, from level charts, receivers, facade maps, meshed maps, measurement maps, grid noise map, digital ground models, vertical maps, a facade operation, and so on and so on. And then there's additional objects that are specific to the optimization, the wall design, and the expert industry. Then there's some external data, which could be like geometry bitmaps or aerial photos. They follow into geometry bitmaps, and then also noise allotment. Now for each of these objects that we have here, the program will have the base settings. And then if you have the cartography module, there's a tab cartography. If you have, and when you have the 3D graphics, then there's typically a tab for the 3D graphic parameters. So here are the base settings in terms of any object. Do you want to show the object? What is the draw sequence? The draw sequence again allows you to determine or define at what point the object gets drawn. So for example, you want to draw typically the building on top of the contour maps, or you want to draw any type of objects that are on top of a building, basically like roof sources on top of the roof. Or you have receivers and you want to have the receiver being shown or drawn after the grid calculation or grid results or contour results or elevation data or aerial photos. So it basically defines you the sequence of kind of like how data is shown. Certain things you may want to draw very early. For example, in terms of the results, some of the results in terms of, for example, grid noise map, you want to have a draw sequence fairly low. So the lowest draw sequence is 1, and then from there it goes up. So the any object that has a draw sequence 1 will be drawn first, and then any higher orders will be drawn on top of the previous objects. Now for each of these other base settings, it depends on what the object is. If the object is just something in terms of like like for example a noise barrier, it breaks it down into multiple additional sub-parameters for walls. The baseline, so that's just the line of where the wall could be. When you actually have a wall, what does the wall look like? If you have any transparency in terms of the wall, what will the transparent sections be drawn with, and so on. So here we can basically define again which objects or which parameters will be drawn. So here are, for example, also buildings. For buildings, which is an area object, you have, of course, the outline, the edge line. So here we have the color of the building. Then we have hatching, we can have fill colors. And then also here we have the use in legend. So here for every object, you can overrule or change the default settings in terms of what SoundPLAN has in the global settings. What is the legend label for this object? So this is kind of like where you can change the labeling, so you don't have to do it over and over again in the legend. So if you change the defaults here, they will remain changed. So these are the base settings, and then of course for any object there might be also cartography settings. So in the cartography settings, for example, on the buildings, there's additional fill, color and edge line parameters that you can change. So under cartography, we can have different line types, and this could be the basically the outline of the building. You could have dotted lines, points, like any type of intervals of dots or lines or interrupted lines. You can have additional patterns that you can assign to the building if you want to add these patterns, or any type of text definition. And the 3D graphics for the buildings, there's of course this is for the most part cubes or any type of shape, and here we can change the visualization, the 3D view, in terms of the transparency, the different surface areas. So this could be the side color, and then the surface area that would be the top color of the building. And then of course if you have anything defined in terms of like a ridge where you define the roof line, you could also color code the roof with in this case, for example, red. Then any other colors in terms of the floor lines can be activated here, show floor lines, or if you have any kind of pedestal where the building is elevated and you want to have I don't know, a lower kind of like a color for the concrete pedestal. Maybe the building is like 3 feet off the ground and has basically a 3-foot foundation. You can put that also in a specific color on top of that. All right. So again, these are all the defaults that you can change. You can change the labeling, the libraries, and so on. Here on the top right here is the reference scale color. So any of the changes that you're defining are always referred to a specific size of any type of mapping. So if you have 4 millimeters, that is for a map that is 1 to 1,000 in scale. If the scale increases to 2,000, then of course the size is getting bigger. I always have to think about that, but these are kind of some of the changes that you can also define as a default. What is your reference scale? So if you typically work on projects that have larger scales that are community-wide or city-wide, or if you have projects that are very relatively small, you may want to change what are your default scales. And then with that, you're maybe closer to the actual end scale in terms of the definition of your line thickness or kind of like point sizes and so on. All right, so let me click OK at this point. So again, here in the graphics, in the global graphics settings, we can define the base units, the color palette, and the object types. And you can do that same thing also in the current projects. So here we have the base units and the object types. Now the colors are typically defined in the current project since 8.2 in the graphics. So let me just open up the graphics and show you here on the parameters. We again have the colors right here. So here we have the colors, and again we can change that and define the color schemes for this project. All right. And then again here, object types in project. So here, object types in project, again, will show up most of the objects right here. And as you load, or if you create a new sheet, a new graphic sheet, the program will pull in all the graphic objects that are in the data that you selected. So if I create a new sheet and all it has in terms of results is grid results, then it only will load in the grid noise map result objects. It will ignore any of the other objects that we have here on the results. The same for any environmental objects. Berm will only be loaded when you have a berm, or if you have a wall, only if there is a wall in the data that you selected. Okay. Then here we have a couple of other presettings, and these presettings again go back to the like settings for that we called out earlier in terms of the base units and objects. And then we have the base settings for elements, and these are, for example, the default colors. So if you create a box, what is the typical default fill color? What is the edge width? So around the box, there will be a basically edge of, in this case, 3 millimeters all around. So any text has to be within 3 millimeters from the edge of or the frame of the box. You can define the edge line. You can pre-default any color of shadows. For text boxes, what kind of fonts do you want to use? And for example, I typically use Arial for my fonts and bold. Then the edge lines for just text boxes. If you want a text or line, I don't necessarily do that. And also no fill color for just if it's a text. Map. For maps, what are like some of the defaults for the frame and so on, and what kind of colors you want. Color scale, here we can define what is, if you start a completely new color scheme, where do you want to start. So for example here, from this color, ascending, and ascending is always from left to right. So this is the default color scheme that will come up for any type of contour maps. But you could change that and then say, okay, I want to use, for example, this one that starts with blue, and then it goes from blue to red here. All right. And then sheets, what are the default pixel if you have any type of maps or like JPEG or PNG pixel density, you can define the pixel density. All right. Last but not least, I want to open up one of these sheets here. And here we have, for example, the grid noise map. And in this grid noise map, we have a total of 6 sheets. Now, one of the things that I want to refer to or mention here is, as I pull that in, this sheet has 6 maps. And for each of the maps, we have an object type, a map object type. And so each of those maps can have very different definition in terms of color schemes, how objects are displayed, what the sequence of the objects are, and what the color of the lines of the areas, how the contours are presented. So each of these have a map object type. So again, we have the global object types, we have the project object types, and then here we have the map object types. And as you develop your project, it will be copied from the global to the project, from the project to the sheet. But then if you have multiple maps on the sheet, then you can still overwrite the defaults and change it to basically customize it to however you want to present the map. And so I think that ends my introduction in terms of the graphics settings. And thank you for listening and have a great day.